Thanks, Vintee. Thank you for so much for your time. The whole objective of this, meeting is to, create some sort of learning for the new fraternity who's coming in the legal profession now. Also for the GCs and the, legal department from, functionary who are taking care of a lot of very complex tasks around legal function, including contract amendment or litigation, etc. So with that, I'll just, give you a quick introduction about myself, and then hear about you, and possibly we'll build the whole questions around your journey so far, and what complexities you've handled, and how you think the legal profession and how you think the legal function is going to pan out in next coming years. My name is Dinesh Sharma. I'm from Volody, founder of Volody, helping businesses in their digitization of legal contract amendment process, working with customers across the globe, across industries, providing them a very smart solution. And I also come from a corporate background, working with companies like Deutsche Bank or Counsel and Hyper International Bank. Largely working with global organizations. So, having worked with such large organizations, I also come with uh, you know some experience about what legal function really look for, and what are the challenges of legal departments. Just want to check with you, with the what's your background, and you did your law from India, and now for last so many years, maybe I would say almost 2 decades now, in the US. So how the journey has been?
Journey has been full of ups and downs because when you move continents thousands of miles away from your homeland,
Right,
things take a little time to settle down and understand a new legal system altogether.
right, right.
You're right. I completed my law and master's LLM in intellectual property from
Mm-hmm.
NLU, Jodhpur, India. But soon I had to move to US and in 2011.
Mm-hmm.
I have been working for over 15 years now in contract reviews, negotiations, document drafting, process management, open source licensing,
Right.
commercial and technology transactions, so on. And now, most recently, the data privacy has taken over everything.
Yeah, yeah.
So, a lot of data privacy, risk mitigation, and resource management now.
Mm-hmm.
I also did my LLM in US laws from George Mason University here,
Right, 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 right.
and now I am their alumni. My journey, though, however, didn't start from doing deciding to do law in India. My
Mm-hmm.
background in law started long before than that. I'm a daughter of a retired judge, so I
Oh,
was
really?
introduced to legal profession since my inception. And the field of law, therefore, amazed me right from my childhood.
Uh-huh.
I've seen the integrity and dignity of the profession in
Oh,
my
yes.
father, the various aspects of law, the power of knowledge that this profession bestows upon the people who seek it, and the empowerment it brings in always excited me.
Right,
Growing up, I noted how it help create opportunities in the lives of people and communities.
right.
Um, and through my father's example, I have endeavored to always become someone who stood up for others.
Mm-hmm.
And my childhood experiences in his court chamber, surrounded by various lawyers, shaped my future professional pursuits,
Absolutely.
actually. So,
Right.
because I was grown in that environment, and born and brought up in that environment, and then several of my family members actually now are in the legal profession back in India. So, having seen that environment, I think that it came organically and naturally to me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I decided to pursue a career in law. It was all great in India due to some personal reasons and family we have to move. And United States had been completely kind and generous. It has taught a lot of values, the professional values to me.
Right.
It has been a great learning curve. And yeah, I'm happy that today I'm sitting with you and talking about it.
Two different continents, and talking about the global legal function. And then, if I look at your career, you worked with organizations starting with Moody's to Cisco, and then, First Tech Credit Union as well. So these are quite diverse organizations, in terms of their business lines or in terms of the industry, etc. So how difficult or how easy was it for you to transition to different roles? And I'm sure your role must be in different handling different type of contracts, or maybe somewhere it must be looking at IP agreements as well, or IP for that of that company as well. So how easy or difficult was it for you to cope up with the new roles as we move into new jobs?
Sure. I think India is a great training land for you to mix up and meet different kind of people and industries. Okay,
Mhm.
we give less credit to it, but we don't understand how much of a big training ground it is for you to go when you go out in the world and
Correct,
in the real world and meet different people from different industry, and how easy it is for us inherently to start adapting pretty quickly in the new
correct.
environments. Having said that, of course, that was the basis, culturally speaking. But yes, US is a completely different has completely different cultural nuance comparing to the professional work culture we have in India. And when I first started out here, when I first started my career, I started with an IT services company in India. It was
Okay.
a global company. It definitely gave me exposure to interact with different industry people from all across the world, specifically US, because most of our clientele was from US
Hmm.
at the time. Um, and because it was an IT services company, which later became a law firm, I was already dealing with different industries, companies, professionals per se. So when
Hmm.
I moved here, I was sort of in my comfort zone because I was already trained to
Right.
interact multiple people coming from different backgrounds. I was fortunate enough to start with a global company, Tata Consultancy Services, with their client
Okay.
Cisco Systems. And being such a giant and a global player in the world, you get to meet such diverse community
Hmm.
that you're not just interacting with an American or an Indian. You're basically interacting with the whole world on your laptop.
Absolutely.
There are
That's correct.
I was working with Chinese, I was working with Europeans, I was working with Americans, Canadians, Australians, Indians. That sort of set for the base for me to, in future work for companies like for credit union, like First Technology, Federal Credit Union,
Hmm.
moved on to risk management solution, Moody's risk management solution. I think my experience in Cisco and Tata Consultancy, and it was through my IT services company and law firm in India. So they were the ones who were actually contracted with TCS and Cisco, and that's how I was introduced to them. But my exposure there definitely set the base for me tremendously to interact with people from different communities and
Right.
diversities and cultures and hygiene. So when I started my role in First Technology, again, I think my stars were aligned. I haven't met better people in my life than
Wow.
in First Technology Credit Union. I think that credit union, and I've left it now, but I'm still a big proponent of that organization as a whole. That credit union survives on human kindness and goodness.
Excellent.
And it gave me this confidence, and it empowered me to gain the confidence to interact uh, effectively and efficiently with anybody, any point of time. It taught me how to actually work under pressure, but also
Right.
maintain work-life balance, which wasn't in my thought process until I joined the credit union. Today, we all talk about work-life balance. We all
I
talk
know.
about a lot of things like that, but I think at the start of my career, I wasn't thinking all that through. Working with First Tech definitely taught me immensely how to interact with human beings with compassion and understanding.
Wow.
And
Excellent.
all those experiences pulled together helped me land a role in Moody's RMS. My stunt was short there, but I think this was one of the best professional learning graph for me because, again, Moody's is the giant of the giants in the world. And just to engage with UK counterparts, European counterparts,
Absolutely.
it was an experience of lifetime for sure.
Yeah.
when you get to meet with so many people on daily basis and interact with them, adapting to different industries become much easier, because at the end of the day, human beings are running all those
And then
industries.
you end up learning also from all these folks, in terms of their
Right,
experience or
right.
how they deal with the situations. So,
Correct, correct. Of course, you have to understand the nuances of a particular
of
industry,
course,
because a financial industry, like I was when I was working in credit union, versus a software industry when I was working for RMS or Cisco, would be different. Their day-to-day operations, the urgency, a sense of urgency to meet the customer requirements would always be different.
correct.
A credit union, because it focuses on the members more, it is more invested because it is non-profit. But a
Mm,
larger giant would be focusing more on fulfilling the customer requirements. So they listen to their customer and then move backwards, right?
correct,
So you have to understand those nuances for sure. And then there are the applicable laws and regulations of that industry. Of course, you have
correct.
to update yourself with that. But and
Mm,
there will always be a learning curve to do it.
of course.
But as long as you bring those aptitude and transferable skills to your performance and job, I think you can manage in any industry.
No, absolutely. I think working for such a diverse sets of organization and working with so many geographies must have given you a lot of learning. And then in your role, Vintee, you handle contracts for open source agreement and technology transfer across geographies, having so many regulations around restrictions, and now that security is also, cyber security is also playing a very critical role. Along with that, data privacy. So, how the contracting process was, or contract execution, drafting, and negotiation was difficult for you, and what kind of challenges you used to face or you face currently when you negotiate these complex large agreements running
Right.
into millions of dollars of value, and also multi-year transactions, and having so many risks and so many possible situations in place.
Yeah. See, I'll start with a quote from World Commerce and Contracting Organization. Your agreements are only as good as their drafting, honestly.
Okay, okay,
So keeping that in mind, I would say that for any legal professional out there, do your basics. Ensure you're doing the minimum of good drafting. Okay, which
okay,
means that forget all the legalese, forget all the complex clauses and sections. First of all, if you're starting out as a contracts professional, make sure your formatting is fine, the fonts match, your titles and your definitions match, because you
okay,
will not believe how much of mediocrity you see in just doing the basics. Okay, and that is one of the biggest challenge for any contract manager or attorney out there. Of course, beyond that, you will start working on understanding your agreement as a whole. You must start
correct,
with understanding the entirety of your agreement, and to you have to sit with your stakeholders to understand the company's vision, mission, goals, values. You have to start with your business owner, the person you're
hmm,
working for, to draft the contract or negotiate the contract, to understand the business need, to understand if it is critical for the company, to give it a sense of urgency, and then start understanding the transaction, and then start defining and then drafting the contract.
correct,
And why I'm saying this is because you have to account for human nature first.
correct.
If you understand the human nature and the kind of person you are dealing with, then contract negotiation or drafting becomes
Much
much
easier,
easier.
much easier. Yeah.
Yeah. For instance, let's say you have decided to review and redline an agreement. Um, it will be really helpful to minimize red lines. If you're using, let's say, customers agreement, it will be way more easier to minimize red lines instead of fully deleting and replacing the verbiage, because your customer doesn't want you to completely deleting sections and red strike throughs. Otherwise, the relationship from the start will only become
Absolutely.
quite negative. Okay. So, and if the language is too far off, just delete and replace it, but avoid as much as you can. Of course, you have to understand that whatever red lines you are making, you are communicating well internally before
Yeah.
sending it out to the customer. and draft with as much straightforward, easy, simple language as much possible. Be as concise and unambiguous as much possible. A lot of attorneys or contract managers or paralegals, contract management professionals, they just copy paste the boilerplate clauses and they don't realize that just picking up and copying pasting the
Yeah.
legalese is not useful. I mean, we are attorneys, we might understand what is written there, but 70 to 80% of the time, a contract is being read by a software professional or a finance guy or
Procurement guys.
or a leader or a layman, basically, who's not well versed with legal language. In the court of law, when people are litigating, the simplest the language is, the easiest and
Easiest. Yeah.
most effective the interpretation would be, and there would be the least chances of disputes happening.
Correct.
So try to be as simple, as concise, as unambiguous as possible. And then of course, don't lose focus on what's important. You must know what your company cannot comply with.
Correct.
You must know what your company does not want to comply with. And then what can cost your company excessively, like the important clauses like indemnification or limitation of liability, representation, and warranty, and all.
Correct.
And of course, at every stage, be in sync with your stakeholders and decision makers, because at the end of the day, you are enabling the contract for a business stakeholder. They are the owners of the contract. Often attorneys bring in their egos, personal biases. You are not the owner of the contract. You are just enabler for somebody else who's the owner of the contract.
And of course, protecting the interest of the stakeholders.
Yeah. Your job is to protect the interest, find alternate transactional solutions for them instead of, sticking yourself out by not budging to understand their viewpoint. Your job is not just one of the biggest challenges that happens is when contract professionals tell the business stakeholders that we cannot do something, but they don't tell why and how we can find an alternate solution. Because a business cannot be run on the grounds of we cannot do something. We need to find alternate mechanisms, transactions, solutions to align with the business goals and values. Otherwise, the business will stop, and that's not good for anybody.
And then you don't need a legal function as well.
Yeah. And then, of course, there are small nitty-gritties. I mean, keep a playbook if possible. If you already have certain language well drafted. Earlier I said don't use boilerplate clauses, but that does not mean that you should not build a bank of effective language that has been drafted in the past. Don't just lift and just copy it blindly, but if you have crafted useful language in the past, no need to waste time rewriting it. You can use the similar verbiage, but you have to verify to see if it is applicable in that for that specific agreement or transaction or not. And then, of course, whenever in doubt, don't be shy of asking help from the peers. You must actually consult your peers. Sometimes you can divulge confidential information. That's okay. You must not. But it's fine to be updated by speaking to industry peers and all. And contract negotiation also, I was talking about drafting all this while, but negotiation also, there could be several challenges. In a negotiation, you engage and interact with multiple parties. They have different interests, goals, expectations, and therefore, as a contract manager or attorney, your job is not just focusing on the legal part. You're basically a resource manager as well. You're also a people manager. Because you have to be someone who can manage the conflicts, delays, and confusion. Especially if the parties are not aligned on the scope and the terms of the agreement. You need to identify those key stakeholders, understand what are their critical business needs, and communicate clearly. Always maintain a calm, respectful, and tactful demeanor, which is a key to effective negotiation. And be flexible. But being flexible does not mean that, draft or negotiate an ambiguous or inconsistent contract, which leads to disputes. Being flexible is to understand the options, the creativity, and the innovation. And then based on those, try to define your scope and contract terms and clauses, accommodate changes and variations accordingly. That will take you a long way in negotiation process. understand the risk, the uncertainty that
Right.
can create a lot of mistrust among the parties. And that will help you. I mean, at the end of the day, just learn to handle
Yeah.
emotions of people all around, and you will achieve an outcome that is, I mean, a lot of people use the term win-win negotiation. I sort of don't believe in that term because you cannot have a win-win outcome in
It
all
has
the
to.
agreements.
Correct. Yeah.
There has to be a balance. Someone will obviously get more out of it, but as long as a party's, let's say there are 10 objectives and all the critical ones are met, and additionally some good to haves are met, I think it's a win outcome in that from that perspective.
But you just talked about being flexible. Sometimes when you're flexible, the other party always try to push things on you to get some clauses in their favor, which you think that this is unfair. So how do you handle such situations?
See, most important is to be aware of the cultural difference between the two parties. And by cultural difference, I mean the company cultural difference. As long and also be extremely clear about, like I first said, what you cannot comply with, what you does not want to comply with, and
Right.
what can cost you a lot if you comply with certain thing. As
Hmm.
long as you have those three markers clear in your head, if the opposing party is not willing to bend down, you really have to make that decision on the basis of those three markers.
Understood.
And of course, being flexible, as I said earlier, also does not mean to draft an unambiguous contract or an uncertain, full of risk prone contract. You have to weigh in the risk factors and versus how much outcome you're receiving out of it. You have to put your feet down at certain point, but it also depends on how much bargaining power you have. If you are a really small vendor just trying to break through in the market to gain customers, this is like really your first 2 3 years 5 years
Correct.
of market
Business.
presence. I don't think you have a lot of bargaining power.
That's correct.
Then it depends on the leadership how much they want to pursue it. At the end of the day, as I said, contract professionals are not the owners of the contract. It is the
That's
business
correct.
stakeholder. If they need to first understand, are these negotiations aligning with my business values?
Correct.
If it's a big company, of course, they have more appetite to for the risks, and they can, of course, even if they lose certain amount of money, they are okay with it because they have been in the market for so long. So they weigh in the risk from a different
Lens.
perspective
Yeah.
altogether. So it all depends if you understand, you have those three markers, and then you understand what is your risk appetite, what is your critical business need, and do you really want this transaction to go through? If you do, then you will find alternate solutions. And then at the end of the day, I have always noticed when there is a will, there is a way.
That's correct.
So,
Absolutely.
yeah, even if the opposing party is just not willing to budge, you have to decide, do you want to do business with such people in the future? Is it really something that is needed? And you make a call accordingly.
No, no, that makes a lot of sense. In this kind of situations, and then when you're working for working in a large organization, and when you've got so many departments and possibly hundreds of people are using contract templates, uh, do you think having a standardized template for certain transactions or certain type of agreements, does that make sense, or you want to work on each contract as a fresh drafting as and when it comes your way, uh, rather instead of having a standardized template which can be used for similar kind of transactions, maybe hundreds or 200s, maybe for a couple of months rather than having change every time.
That's a really great question. And I think I touched upon it slightly when I was speaking earlier about the boilerplate clauses and
Right.
playbooks. You definitely should and must create a bank of well-drafted clauses, standardized templates, playbooks, create playbooks. And do you use it frequently or not depends on the kind of business you are in, kind of departmental transaction you are dealing with. If it's something which is redundant, if it is something which is repetitive, if it is something for which you already have had experience managing before,
Correct.
definitely use those standardized templates because time is money. You cannot be just investing all your time in creating drafts, a fresh draft each time you are
All the time. Yeah.
sitting through all the time. Of course, there are times you have to tailor your drafts according to the need of that transaction for sure. Using the playbook, standardized templates would still need certain amount of tweaking and red lines from time to time, depending on changing, let's say, geopolitical climate or updates in laws and regulations, or just basically you might be dealing with a company with whom you have done several transactions before, but this time perhaps, let's say for example, you're dealing with a company with whom you have worked on on-premise software,
Hmm.
um, and now you're working with them on a cloud version. So
Right.
now you know the cultural nuance of that company, you know what kind of
That's it.
transaction you're dealing with, but the transaction is still different because there are terms that would be applicable in on-premise and then there are terms which are applicable in cloud version. And from that perspective, you can use the standardized template, but you'll have to, of course, tweak it to ensure that the scope and deliverables would become different. The obligations will become different in a cloud version agreement, or let's say a SaaS agreement per se. So I strongly suggest and recommend using standardized templates, but you need to revise them from time to time. If there are no changes in laws and regulations, compliance procedures, or anything, then I think you can visit them on an yearly basis to
Right.
see if there are any tweaks are required. But for instance, when GDPR came in, or when in California CCPA came in, CPRA came in, now in India we have a new Data Protection Act
Right.
coming in. Obviously, you have to immediately jump and revise your standardized templates to accommodate the changing requirements. When COVID-19 happened, or with all the unrest and wars and all that have happened so far, the force majeure clause suddenly became important. So you have to, nobody was looking at it for years, and
Yeah.
suddenly it has stolen the limelight of the contracts
Yeah.
because,
That's great.
um, right. So you from those perspectives, I strongly recommend using standardized templates, especially if you are working in a corporate. Um, uh, in law firms, things work little differently. I have little experience working directly in a law firm. I started my career there, but eventually moved on to corporate. But I've worked with a lot of law firm counsels,
Mm.
and because they have varied customers, of course, their drafting requirements are different from a corporate. But in case of corporate, you have to have standardized template. Otherwise, because the volume that comes in,
Yeah.
you cannot draft on
Can't
a
handle
everyday
it.
basis.
Right. You
But
just
as I
talked
said,
about. Sorry, please go on.
yeah, yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. No, no. Go ahead.
You just talked about geopolitical COVID, and I was about to touch these points about geopolitical or supply chain disruptions, sanctions, and the wars happening every year. So how it has changed the whole contracting process? Have you created some sort of a fresh sets of boilerplate for these situations, which you think uh, are really mandatory or necessity for all kind of contracts which involving multiple countries?
Yeah. Well, like I just said, force majeure has stolen the limelight recently in last 2, 3 years. Nobody was looking at it, and suddenly has a shining moment.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So first and foremost, when COVID-19 hit, I think obviously a lot of vendors and customers were going through a lot of supply chain disruptions, performance delays, procedural delays, and all. They all found a respite in that act of God, pandemic verbiage in the clause. But soon, and initially, I think everybody was supportive because it wasn't in anybody's control.
Right.
But we also saw a lot of misuse of the clause. People started excusing their performances purely on that basis without meeting their timelines and milestones. Whenever they were short of meeting the timelines and
Okay.
milestones, they would just give the excuse of performance under force majeure. And after I think the first 2 years, everybody started realizing on the vendor, on the customer side that but the business cannot be run in that function. We have to be empathetic and sympathetic to vendors who have suffered miserably. But at the end of the day, after 2.5 years, when the COVID started getting down, we
Yeah.
had to find resolution because we couldn't go on just on the basis of that. So we did made a change in the clause. We removed the word pandemic first and foremost, and added the replaced it with the word government orders. Because largely what we realize is if a lockdown happens, it happens because of the government order. If a war happens, and the supply chain gets disrupted, it happens because of a government order or a decision. Um, uh, and if that happens, we absolutely will support the vendor, because obviously there are few things that are absolutely out of control. And we have to be, as I said, compassionate and understanding on that front.
So that's a very
But
great point you added.
yeah, but and government order, government decision, or government regulation, if you add those words and remove the
Hmm.
pandemics or wars and all, that would still give them the protection and coverage, but that will also balance out the protection for the customer. So that was one of the big change that I think a lot of attorneys have made recently in the clause. Additionally, of course, you have to reevaluate the indemnity limitation of liability in these circumstances. We also have to be flexible on the timelines and milestones. We cannot just be absolutely hell-bent on setting up a date for something, keeping in mind the fluctuations that are happening in the market. So, in SOW, scope of deliverables, timelines and milestones took a heavy change. A more time and material sort of provisions are now in place compared to the fixed cost ones. I'll go back to the limitation of liability and indemnity. We have to also see how much of an insurance can cover for
Okay.
a
Yeah.
vendor
Yeah.
in case of such disruptions. And we can, include 5 times, 3 times, 4 times limitation of liability. But does vendors' insurance really covering
Correct.
it?
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's of no use. So we had to revisit all those. I mean, traditionally also we used to look at these, but I think after all these geopolitical changes and pandemics and all, it has become even more important to look at all these scenarios and revisit them on one angle with compassion and understanding, and on another angle from the business continuity point of view as well.
Right.
We also had to look into the clauses like transition assistance. I mean, and for some reason,
Okay.
let's say
Yeah.
the vendor isn't able to perform their obligations and just come to us saying that, see, it's not happening.
Can't
Or
handle
we
it.
also, I mean, from the customer point of view, we also feel that, so far we have handheld, but now our business is impacting and we just cannot continue because of that. Then we also
That's
need to
true.
see how much of transition assistance we need before
Hmm.
we move on to another vendor or
Correct.
customer. So
Yeah.
those are some of the nuances that we had to work on, of course.
Hmm.
And then whatever laws and regulations came on in order to support the vendors and customers, we have to be mindful of that. Like during the COVID, when I was part of the credit union at the time, and government here was foregoing small loans and
Okay.
small business owners loans and all. So we have to be mindful of that also, that we cannot push them to pay back the mortgages at the time when they absolutely have no source of income to pay back, and support them with rather small loans instead. So obviously those nuances will come from uh, things like I'll give, and then there were times we have to put our foot down for certain things. We don't also like it. For instance, when the war between Russia and Ukraine
Okay.
erupted,
Hmm.
of course, several sanctions were put
Oh
on
yeah.
in doing business with, excuse me, professionals from that part of the world. And then we have to be mindful in ensuring that we are not really hiring in future or contracting in future for the amount of time a government. So that's where the government order comes into the
Yeah.
scene once.
Correct.
I
Correct.
started with that and I'm going to end with it, that you have to see
Yeah.
what is the government order over
You know,
there.
I think that's a very good, view about the situation when you had last week. Now, when you work on global contracts, jurisdiction always a challenging questions because we all want to have our own preference of jurisdiction, and sometimes the counterparty has got a more negotiation power, and they push
Hmm.
for winning jurisdiction. So how do you handle those situations? And do you have some preferred jurisdictions which you think are pretty much acceptable to all the global corporates, which can possibly take care of the need of both the parties?
Yeah. Yeah, jurisdiction is, of course, one of the most negotiated clauses in any contract, whether even domestically, so internationally, it becomes even more difficult. When you work in a global company, you, of course, decide on a couple of choice of law and jurisdiction provisions. it becomes much easier if you're a global company, I would say, because then you have the option to from many choices available. For instance, in some of the large companies I've worked for US, they usually prefer to have California or New York or Delaware, as these are the more friendlier, favorable places from the choice of law perspective. They are more business friendly also, and their laws are more supportive and widely litigated. So there is a lot of historical database and case law basis to fight,
Okay.
right? Internationally, if you're working for a global company, we also tend to have a jurisdiction in each of the countries where the offices are located. I think the most preferable jurisdiction I have seen, or choice of law I've seen for UK, is England and Wales. I know UK is divided into a couple, but England and Wales is one of the best sort of the choices. Um, Singapore is the haven for a lot of international agreements, because if you just can decide on, I think it is one of the most friendliest common uh, the denominator where everybody seems to agree upon, especially if they're fighting over it. And most importantly, and most interestingly, in most of the cross-border international agreements, people are just leaving out the choice of law and jurisdiction clauses, honestly, because then the court has the option to choose where to, you know, a lot of attorneys follow that approach. They just leave it out completely. Because in case of a dispute, if both the parties completely can't see eye to an eye on jurisdiction, they just leave it, uh, and they let the court decide in the matter of dispute where to actually do it, because it's far easier, because anyway you are litigating, let the court very well litigate on the said issue as well. It is quite interesting and was quite surprising for me when I first learned about it, but increasingly I've seen attorneys negotiating that, when leaving it out when negotiating, because when they cannot see eye to an eye between each other. And I think it's a great strategy if you, of course, you have to weigh in the risk factors. If you believe that that is the only sticking point left, let the court decide in case litigation it goes to the litigation stage. Um, of course, most of the litigations are based on where the business is domiciled. In United States, of course, that traditionally, you should have a domicile, you should be present when served, there should be consent. There are legal terms I don't want to get into, but long arm and constitutionality is all. I don't think for this discussion we need to get into so much
Yeah, yeah,
legalese, but
that's
there are a lot of factors that helps in deciding what kind, how will they decide the jurisdiction, venue, and forum. But yeah, that is a sticking point from a lot of times in international agreements. But if you're a global company, it becomes much easier. If you're negotiating with a party which has more bargaining power, you definitely have to sometimes just bow down to
yeah,
it.
correct.
You do need to, however, understand that if you agree to something uh, that is not in your jurisdiction, then you perhaps need to hire an outside counsel
That's correct.
or the counsel of that jurisdiction to completely understand how much you will need to interpret the law. Hiring professionals who are familiar with the legal system and business practices of the country wherever you are performing your contract is best if you want to prevent future issues. If you have, for instance, you're an English speaker but you're contracting with a French uh, company, yeah, it will be very hard for you to understand the French laws. It's a civil law country. You're coming from a common law country.
Mm-hmm.
So it's best that these legal experts provide you with insight on local laws and regulations so that you can manage all potential risks. Also, these local councils will be able to tell you more about the cultural
Correct.
differences than you would know yourself, the communication styles, the business practices, the cultural nuances, and all. So, you have to keep it in mind that if you're agreeing to something like that, then it's best you go and work with a local
Expert.
council.
So, there has been a lot of changes happening in the legal contract management in terms of negotiation, in terms of drafting. This generative AI has come up with a lot of exciting functionalities and exciting features, which is definitely giving a lot of armories to legal professionals. But at the same time, uh, it seems to me that they see this as a potential risk. What is your sense about generative AI for legal contract drafting process, and how this is going to pan out in next 5 years? And what do you think it is? Is it really helping the legal fraternity, or it is a big risk for the legal fraternity?
Yeah, you've touched on you're talking about elephant in the room. We cannot
Right?
deny that it's a real threat, especially for someone like me as a
Is
contract
is,
drafter.
is it a threat?
I'll come to it. I think I mean, I was joking mainly, but I see it as an extremely useful tool to help me out draft the contract more efficiently, build my arguments for litigation, or summarize the important clauses for negotiation more effectively and efficiently. I think if used wisely, generative AI will be a game changer. Will it take away the jobs? I think you cannot deny that
Yeah.
it has the potential to do it, but it
Okay.
cannot take away the human intelligence out. Because it's the humans who have built generative AI and not the opposite. Um, we can definitely and must use it for generating the contracts, I believe, but quality of the draft, its legal compliance with laws, rules,
Hmm.
regulation, need a human expertise. If you're good in your job, I don't think your job is at risk because you, as the expert in the field, would be using it more effectively rather getting being replaced by it. At its current format and capabilities, and I haven't used many CLM tools other than just a handful that are not using generative AI as much as your tool is doing, Dinesh. I think you're doing it quite effectively and efficiently. But most of them at their current format and capabilities, it will be hard to replace human negotiations and litigations.
Hmm.
But its efficient use in making the arguments with appropriate checkpoints and verification mechanisms will be tremendously helpful. Um, I also want to point out that recently there have been Supreme Court cases here where they haven't given the status of. So there was a famous copyright case here recently where generative AI had created something and the copyright was applied for, and the Copyright
Understood.
Office refused to give the copyright because the minimum modicum of creativity has to come from a human being and not from a AI model. And obviously, it goes beyond all the laws and scope of all laws
Right.
and regulations to
Hmm.
grant a copyright to a non-human.
Hmm.
So things like that will always come in place. In litigations, I mean, a machine cannot represent a human being. Correct. So obviously, those will always, when you are negotiating something, I mean, you cannot negotiate with a machine, but
Yeah.
it will definitely going to be extremely useful in managing the contracts and drafting the contracts. It will be extremely useful to see in creating built-in templates, clause libraries, playbooks. It'll
Hmm.
be extremely helpful to create the workflows for requests and approvals.
Right.
It'll be extremely helpful in executing the contracts, ingestion into the contract repositories, whether they're ongoing or current ones. They will be extremely helpful in e-signatures, final approval processes, reporting on all data points.
Hmm.
I cannot say enough about how useful it will be for the automated reminders of renewals, expirations,
Yeah. Absolutely.
deliverables, deadlines.
Right.
It'll be greatly useful for single sign-ons, connect to other reporting tools. For instance, contract managers have to utilize a lot of API push and pull from other internal systems, finance and purchasing, an EDW or a Tableau kind of thing. So definitely it has great scope in that department. And these are some of the ones that I can just see
Yeah.
now. Of course, in future there will be many more inventions in the area, and I am extremely positive. I think if this is not a time to fight against it, this is a time to actually embrace it and learn what you can do with it and how best you can come out by
Yeah.
using it. My biggest concern actually is not taking away of the jobs because, as I
Right.
said, if you're good in your job, you will rather use it to improve yourself.
Improve.
My biggest concern is data scrapping. We need to really know, and there are a lot of regulatory discussions happening, especially in California right now, about it. The sources from where these AI tools are scrapping data from. Are
Hmm.
they breaching a person's data privacy to such an extent that now, I mean, they know everything about us? And are they providing sufficient opt-out provisions and options to people around? That is a bigger concern. Then actually, I think AI is extremely helpful, not just in contract management. Think from the healthcare point of view. I mean, it can do wonders for hospital management, for
Yeah.
pharma management, for contracts in those areas as well. So especially in US, like everything is automated. So AI will be a great game changer for patient management.
No, I think that's
Um,
a great one, Vintee. Uh,
yeah, but scrapping of data is a big concern, I think, all around the world currently.
no, that's a very valid point. I think that should, opt-out option should always be there.
Yeah.
We've taken too much of your time in these almost now, more than I'll have a last questions, before I, let you go. Uh, you know, in everybody's role, there is a, you know, mentorship. You always there's a lot of guidance you get through mentors, and I'm sure everybody's career has got many mentors, who shape your career. So what has been your experience so far? I mean, did you find some mentor who help you in building your career in the uh, legal role within the US?
I was extremely fortunate to start my career with one of the best IP lawyers, I would say, in the world. I cannot praise enough from what
Okay.
I have learned from him. His name is Dr. Kalyan Kankanala. And he was not just my mentor, he was my teacher, he was my guide, a friend, and who has really shaped my thought process, my legal aptitude, my
Hmm.
way of dealing with people, my people management skills, and all. Throughout my career, I've been fortunate enough to meet a lot of people, and I'm someone who derive inspiration from everyday folks I meet on the job. So I
Correct.
wouldn't say there was just one mentor, but of course, my first mentor, so to speak, and I've never told him personally. So if he sees this podcast, he'll feel like he'll perhaps be embarrassed of me. But um, yeah,
He'll
of
be
course,
proud of
Todd
you. He'll be definitely proud of you.
hopefully. And then, of course, there were several of my peers from time to time. Who worked with me, with whom I drew inspiration from. But I mean, I draw inspiration from my dad, from my family, from my friends. But one name after Kalyan, Dr. Kalyan, that comes in mind is someone from First Tech. His name is Ken Smith. Again, I've never told him, and they'll be both of them will be like, oh God. But I think the compassion and understanding, the the things that we were talking about before in dealing with diverse population and industries and all is something I learned from him. He
Mhm.
always told me use your two ears and one mouth in that proportion, because when you do that, you automatically are on the path of success. You have to be a great listener in order to fully comprehend and understand anything in your life, especially in contract management. The more you listen and the less you speak, and of course, we have to speak a lot, present our arguments and all, but for
Of course,
that,
yeah.
we have to listen.
Right.
And yeah, but as I said, I have been really fortunate to have worked with extremely great skill set of people, great people with varied skill set, and who have I mean, these are just the two names, but there are so many times you see a person on the road and you get inspired from the sheer hard work they are doing in just pulling a cart on the road. There are times we have seen so many heroes in COVID-19 doing
Yeah.
so much work relentlessly and uh, for no money or no hidden agenda behind them. You draw inspiration from your life experiences. Um, and so, yeah, I think your life is the biggest mentor if you see it
Yeah.
that way. But yeah, these two have been great. They've always taught me to put health first, family first, work first. I know there's a lot of debate recently in India about doing a 70-hour work.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think women's have always been working 100 hours a week. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. More than that, there's so many
I'm more than
responsibilities.
that, actually. So I don't think that argument anyway is material. But I think without getting into the politics of it, I think you draw inspirations from so many people all around you all the time. And I was truly fortunate to have some of really prominent people in my life to do
Thank
that.
you so much, Vintee. Thank you for your time today. It was really pleasure talking to you. And I look forward to be in touch with you. And we'll take this ahead. And once editing is done, I'll share it with you before we post it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dinesh, so much. It was a pleasure talking to you and engaging with you. I hope to stay in touch as well and hopefully be useful in any way I can. Yeah, I truly appreciate.
Thank you so much. You have a great day ahead, and and week ahead, and look forward to be in touch with you. All right.
Absolutely. Same here.
Thank
My
you.
pleasure.
Thank
Thank
you so
you.
much.
Bye.
Goodbye. Bye.